Hello, and welcome back to the Sugar Mama podcast, where I talk about all things related to balancing your blood sugar. I'm Jennifer Hoppert, certified holistic nutrition therapist and owner of Produce Health Nutrition Company. Produce Health Nutrition creates corporate nutritional health and wellness programs that shows employees how to balance their glucose levels naturally, which leads to better overall health, less insurance and medical costs, and optimizes employee attendance and productivity. If you want to know more, please visit www.phncompany.com. In our show today, I'll explain the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. I'll give a simplified, easy-to-understand description of how glucose gets created during digestion, what happens if the system gets compromised, and what you can do to support your body naturally. Okay, let's get started. So in a typical body without any major health conditions, your body runs on glucose. It's a type of sugar that comes from the food you eat, especially like carbohydrates. You eat the food, you break it down, the sugar, once it hits your blood, the name changes suddenly and it's called glucose, okay? After you eat, your digestive system breaks down the food and releases this glucose into your bloodstream. When you eat a lot of carbs, you end up with a lot of glucose. So the amount of glucose entering the blood will have a big influence on the amount of insulin that your pancreas makes to deal with glucose. When you eat carbs by themselves, the breakdown of those carbs happens especially fast. So fast that they filter in your bloodstream quickly, and it's like a tidal wave of sugar flooding your bloodstream all at once. We call that the glucose spike. This is not good for several reasons I'm going to explain in this episode. But first, let's continue on this thread of just what happens with normal digestion in a normal body. Okay, so I'm getting back to the breakdown of carbs into glucose that enters your bloodstream on a daily basis. So your pancreas, it sits on your left side, kind of a little bit below your stomach. Your pancreas responds to the rise in glucose by releasing insulin. Insulin is a hormone, and it acts like a key. It sort of, quote, unlocks, unquote, all of your cells so glucose can move from the bloodstream into cells where it's used for energy. Without insulin, glucose is going to build up outside of the cell in the bloodstream instead of entering the fuel where, again, it's used as, instead of entering the cell where it is used as fuel. Okay, so that's the gist of it. So before I go on, I just want to make a little point. A lot of people go, okay, so like this is happening in my cells. What's happening in the rest of my body? Your cells are your body. Our body. We are nothing but a walking, talking conglomeration of cells that are working and communicating together in a very sophisticated sequence of events. So you don't have cells. You are cells. So when I say, these glucose is fueling these cells, I'm talking about every little cell in your body. I mean, there is an exception with certain cells, but I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to try to keep this very, very simple. Okay, remember, this is me just kind of explaining in layman's terms the simplified version of glucose and insulin and digestion. This is so that you can understand it without getting lost in all the really confusing medical jargon. Okay, so again, that's the gist of it, right? That's how our body works. Now, here's where type 1 and type 2 diabetes differ, because most people don't actually realize there is a difference between type 1 and type 2. Type 2 isn't just a more advanced of type 1. They are quite different, and I'm going to talk about it. So here we go. In type 1 diabetes, your immune cell attacks your insulin-producing cells in your pancreas. These are called beta cells. The beta cells are what make the insulin. This results in the body making little or no insulin. This, we sometimes see that this is going to start, we usually see this starts in childhood or adolescence, and people with type 1 need daily insulin to survive. Okay? Now, why would this happen? Well, It could happen if the beta cells in the pancreas are damaged, like some kind of an accident, maybe a car accident that has damaged the pancreas and in the area where the beta cells are. Maybe medications have damaged them, or a severe illness might damage them as well. What's important to know is that those little crucial beta cells are destroyed, and when they are destroyed, they are gone for good. They don't grow back. So if you have destroyed beta cells, you are going to have a big insulin issue. You'll most likely need external insulin injections just to handle your glucose on a daily basis. So that's type 1. Type 2 diabetes, the body is still making insulin, but it either doesn't make enough, or maybe the cells aren't really responding properly. And this is called insulin resistance. And over time, blood sugar levels rise because glucose can't get into the cells effectively. Type 2 is more common in adults, but it's scary to say it is showing up in younger people too, especially with rising rates of childhood obesity. You might be saying, okay, well, I don't really get what obesity has to do with insulin. Well, I said insulin acts like a key that unlocks the cell door. So it's going to allow glucose to enter in to be used as fuel for the little cell. But if you eat a lot of food, maybe too much, if it's really high in sugary carbohydrates, you have a lot of glucose. So your beta cells are going to make a lot of insulin. And insulin converts extra glucose to fat. It sends it to be stored in the fat cells. That's why obesity is related to diabetes issues. And this is where I want to describe what happens when this system is abused or is breaking down for some other reason. Now, you got to think of this process happening several times a day, several days a week, several weeks a month, and months and years and years and years, okay? So imagine if you keep eating like that, and your glucose is constantly really high because you either eat a lot of sugars and carbs, or you just eat a lot during the day, and then maybe during the night you wake up and have snacks at night while you should be sleeping, and you don't burn off the glucose because maybe you don't exercise that much. This is maybe, how this starts to happen. Now, exercise makes the muscle cells work harder. And when they're working harder, they need more fuel. So they take in and burn more glucose. And that is a beautiful thing. This is why exercise is such a big part of a healthy body. But I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole right now. We can talk about that at a later episode. So if you eat a lot of carbs and you don't exercise, the cell has too much fuel. So it's burning it off slower and taking in more glucose, but there's so darn much glucose in the blood that the cell doesn't really need anymore. In the meantime, insulin is at the cell's door, knocking on the door saying, hey, there's a lot of glucose out here, and it's making me nervous, so could you open the door and let some in? But the cell is like, yeah, I don't really need any more right now. I'm full already, and there's not a lot of room in here right now, but I'll open the door when I need more. But insulin knocks again and is like, yeah, that may be so, but I still really want you to take more in right now. And the cell says, look, man, I told you, not now, I'm full. And this conversation goes on and on and on till after a while, the cell just starts ignoring the knocking insulin. The pancreas is kind of listening to this and then, acts like one of those old-fashioned blowhards. Is like, well, if it don't fit, just use a bigger hammer. And so the beta cells secrete more insulin into the bloodstream. So now the cell has more insulin knocking on the door, and it's ignoring even harder, and trying to ignore more louder knocking. And this keeps going on and on and on. Eventually, the cell kind of short circuits and just stops listening and stops responding to the insulin at all. I mean, even if it's empty of glucose and it does actually need that glucose, it doesn't open, or maybe it only opens once in a while, or maybe it's only letting in a little bit of glucose at a time, which actually isn't enough. This is what is called insulin resistance, and it is a key marker of type 2 diabetes. Also, consider that pancreas, which keeps getting the message that the cell must not be listening to insulin because there's so much glucose all over the place in the blood, and so it keeps making more insulin day after day after day after year after year. Well, it's still trying to use that bigger hammer by making more insulin, right? That's my hammer metaphor. But you can imagine that those poor little beta cells are going to start to fry out. They are overworked, and eventually they're going to collapse and maybe die. And what does that mean? No more insulin gets made. And that's how type 2 diabetes can lead to type 1 diabetes. So, too much glucose in the blood at any given time is not a good thing. Yes, it is met with insulin that works to get the glucose into the cells and out of the blood, but too much insulin is also not a good thing. I will go into what's wrong with too much insulin in a later episode, because that gets really sciencey, and that's another topic that is I don't want to go into right now because it's kind of a long story. But we're going to talk about right now. I'm talking about why is too much glucose a problem? Well, really, there's two reasons. Now, some people might go, "Oh, there's more than two reasons." Yeah, there's more than two reasons, but to simplify it and get the message, the gist of it, the big picture of it to you guys, I'm just going to kind of narrow it down to these two reasons, okay? Again, this is a simplified version of how this is working. It's not, it's not anatomy class. Okay. So, your muscle and liver cells, they can actually take in extra glucose and store it for later use. And that's because those two kinds of cells are really active. They're usually burning a lot of fuel. So they can actually take in a lot of glucose and store it as they burn more, okay? This stored glucose is called glycogen. It's kind of like when sugar hits the bloodstream, we call it glucose. When glucose gets stored, we call it glycogen, right? And when those cells start to run low, they can access this stored glycogen in them and use it for fuel. Well, they might be also taking in more glucose storage little by little as it filters into the blood. So this is a great strategy for the body to have fuel when resources are running low, like if there's a shortage of food available, which was common thousands of years ago, but not so much nowadays. But this whole thing of storing this glycogen, it only goes so far. I mean, those cells can only handle so much. And if there's still extra glucose in the blood after these little cells fill up with their storage, insulin and our livers are going to work together to convert this extra glucose in the blood into triglycerides. Triglycerides are a form of fat that comes from food, and they're important and they're necessary. But when you have a lot of them, too many of them, it often gets involved in cardiovascular disease. So that is a major point to remember. I'm going to go back and repeat that because I really want you to get this, because this is not something that's commonly understood. Excessive glucose will be converted into triglycerides. Triglycerides are implicated, high triglyceride levels are implicated and involved in cardiovascular disease. A lot of people think because you get triglycerides from fatty foods that's what rises them. Yeah, a little bit, but mainly it's the sugar being converted, because we eat more sugar than we eat more fat, generally speaking. So that's a big, that's a big thing to understand. Okay. So these newly formed triglycerides that used to be glucose but got converted to triglycerides, they travel through the body and end up getting stored in fat cells. It's kind of like a long-term storage. Now, as triglycerides are traveling through the body, the more I shouldn't get into this. I want to say this, but I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to give you a little preemptive hint as to why triglycerides are bad, is because if you've got a lot of triglycerides, you're going to have a lot of LDL particles. So that's the kind of the main key for those two things, associating with each other. Okay. And if you missed it and you don't get that, that's okay. I'm going to be talking about this in a later episode that I haven't made yet. But when I do, I will send out an email to everybody who is on my email list and say, this is where I explain triglycerides. Okay. Back to my topic, for Christ's sake. All right. So we're talking about triglycerides becoming long-term storage, right? They used to be blood sugar, used to be glucose. Now it's triglycerides. Now they're in long-term storage into our fat cells, making our fat cells bigger and making us make more because we got more triglycerides that need to be stored. So why does our body do this? This doesn't work. We don't like it. We don't want it. Why is this happening? It happens because our bodies don't evolve very quickly. So it takes about 50,000 years to see evidence of evolution. So if you think about it, our bodies today are functioning as if we were living in a world as it was 50,000 years ago. When we didn't have drive-through fast food restaurants or 24-hour convenience stores, we didn't even have granola bars or coffee shops or ice cream stores or even grocery stores, right? Back then, we had to go out and hunt down and kill our food with our bare hands, or maybe go out exploring and foraging for it in plants and berries and things. So because of this, our body is programmed to store any excess calories for later when the food shortage occurs. Now, this is a brilliant survival mechanism that keeps us from starving. But obviously, it's obsolete, right? It's in our modern day, if you're living in a first world country and call yourself fortunate, this mechanism is obsolete. So, I know not every country is fortunate enough to have so much food, and I don't mean to be insensitive. I'm just trying to explain why our bodies do this. So don't bust me on any kind of politics right now. I'm just trying to tell you what we're dealing with, physiologically speaking, why we store so many calories. You can thank slow-moving evolution for that. The second reason too much glucose is bad is because it creates advanced glycation end products, also known as AGEs. You can call them AGEs. And AGEs are kind of like tangles of sugar and protein and immune cells and other kinds of cells that they are kind of flowing through our blood, because that's where all these cells and molecules meet up and they get tangled up in each other because sugar's sticky on the inside like it is on the outside. So I'm not really going to go too deep into what AGEs are. I will in a later episode again, because they're super important to know. Just now, know that this is when we have too much glucose, we get advanced glycation end products, AGEs. And they are bad news. Why? Because they create damaged tissues all over our body, including our brain. We want very much to avoid AGEs. They literally age our bodies. It's a play on words, but it's really not funny at all. Okay. So up to this point, I've kind of explained to you the physiology and how the body works. I've explained the difference between type 1 and type 2. I understand how it might be a little confusing, so I'm going to use an analogy to help explain type 2 diabetes, and hopefully this will help you remember it, okay? So our cells are imagine they're like nightclubs, the actual building of like a really fun nightclub where you go out with your friends on the weekends dancing and having fun, right? So the cell is the building of the nightclub. Insulin is like the doorman standing outside. And glucose is like the party people, the club goers, the people who want to get into the club and buy drinks and dance and have fun. Okay? Now, imagine if the club is full, it's going to tell the doorman to not let anybody in until some people leave. But if the doorman keeps knocking on the door incessantly because the people are starting to pile up outside on the sidewalk and he's like, ooh, get a lot of people here. If he keeps knocking constantly and the club's like, we're full, can't let anybody in right now, they're going to eventually just maybe lock the door and ignore the doorman because they're like, there's nothing we can do about it. We're full. As the night goes on, party people, they're going to leave the club, maybe out the back door. And as the club empties, it maybe forgets that the front door is still locked and the doorman still can't let anybody in. He keeps knocking, but the club is so used to ignoring the doorman that it kind of forgets to unlock that door. And so no new people get in. And eventually, the club is empty. Tons of people outside waiting to get in. But, if the club is empty, it's not going to be selling any drinks and it's not going to be making any money, right? So in the meantime, out on the sidewalk, you've got lots of people still wanting to be let into the club. They've been waiting a long time. They're starting to get irritated. They're cold. They don't want to be standing anymore. They want in. Maybe, you get some skirmishes, some fights break out. Maybe some people start getting frustrated, so they start breaking windows and rioting a little. I mean, obviously, I'm going to an extreme, but it's a metaphor, right? Point is, they start damaging the surrounding neighborhoods, and you start to get trouble, in the area of the club. In other words, trouble in the area of your cell. So if this is going to continue every night, this sort of lack of ability to get people in the club because the club is full, if this continues night after night, these party people are going to keep showing up. They keep getting frustrated. They're going to wreck the neighborhood. The club's not selling any drinks. There's nobody inside. The club's not going to stay in business. It's going to go bankrupt. And then the neighborhood around the club is going to be wrecked. Okay? So that's my analogy on how type 2 diabetes happens when the cell becomes insulin resistant. So I hope it helps. Okay, so I'm going to summarize what I've talked about today. So type 1 diabetes happens when our beta cells, which are in our pancreas, they get damaged or destroyed by injury or by our attacking immune cells. Insulin then is not created, and our glucose gets too high, but our cells don't get the fuel they need to operate. It generally gets diagnosed earlier in life, and it has very little connection to our diet or lifestyle. It is directly affected by our diet and lifestyle. Okay, that's a hard one to say because yes, those two are connected, but what I'm saying is it's not created from choices of our diet or lifestyle, right? It's an autoimmune disorder. People with this condition will need exogenous insulin. That means like medication, insulin medication and injections. And they're going to need it on a daily basis to help themselves use their glucose. So type 2 is when our daily glucose levels are continuously high and our insulin is continuously high as well. So high that our cells kind of stop responding to insulin's call. So the cells are starting to not get the fuel they need to operate. This condition is often diagnosed a little bit later in life and is directly linked to lifestyle choices. And this is why I'm here talking about it. I want you to learn that this is important, and I want you to know you have some control over whether or not you develop type 2 diabetes. I mean, sure, some people who are more genetically predisposed are going to have to be a little bit more careful. But the sooner you start changing your diet and your bad lifestyle choices that are leading you to type 2 diabetes, the more likely you are at never even developing the disease in the first place. Okay? It's something that I think everybody should know. Because I'm going to ask you, do you remember learning about this in school? Probably not. I mean, I wasn't the best student, I'll admit, in high school. And I don't remember learning anything about this in biology. Hopefully nowadays the kids are paying more attention. Anyway, do you think the food industry is concerned about you getting type 2 diabetes? Probably not, right? They're interested in profits. Most doctors, they don't say anything if they see your results are creeping closer to type 2 diabetes, and I don't know why. Maybe they don't review the blood test. Maybe they only get if there's a flag, if something out of range and they're flagged and they look at that. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. But it's a shame because, it's called preventative medicine. If you get your blood tested year after year and every year it's getting higher and higher and higher, somebody should say, hey, look at this. You got to make some changes. You're going in the wrong direction. It's going to lead to some serious problems, Well, that doesn't really happen. I don't know a lot of people. I've coached a lot of people, and not many of their doctors have pointed out when their glucose is too high. Okay, so there you have it, okay? The physiology on how glucose is made, how insulin works with it, how the cells respond and use it, the difference between type 1 and type 2, and, a little bit of information also about triglycerides. So, if you're ready to take control of your health and learn more strategies for balancing your glucose levels, be sure to subscribe to the Sugar Mama podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And if you want more personalized support, head over to my website at www.phncompany.com. You can also join my 12-week program where I work with you closely every step of the way, week after week, each week introducing a new aspect of healthy living for balanced glucose. You can also follow me for more tips and information on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Alignable. Thanks so much for tuning in to my episode. I'm so excited to be part of your health journey and have you part of my journey with my podcast. And remember, every step you take is a step closer to a healthier you, but we're not rushing it because we're looking for progress, not perfection. So stay tuned for future episodes to keep your blood sugar in check. Let's get happy, healthy, and wise together.
Jennifer Hoppert is a holistic nutrition therapist, master certified in the state of Colorado. Holistic nutritional therapists are not medical doctors and legally are prohibited from diagnosing, prescribing, or treating disease. Any information you receive from this podcast show should not be assumed as medical treatment and should not replace any medical diagnosis, prescriptions, or treatments from your doctor. Consult with your physician before trying any new supplements or exercise routines.